It was a big story, right? Just a lot of chaos.
The JonBenet Ramsey murder.
They made up their mind on day one that I killed my daughter.
3 decades on,
You can't comprehend that anybody would be that evil.
it's still unsolved.
Law enforcement never opened that door.
But now detectives are doing what they should have done in the first place.
There was no doubt in your mind that a stun gun was used.
I was about as sure as I could be.
Following the evidence.
You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes. This is what we call a clue.
Find the killer, take that burden off of my father.
Yes, it's been a long time in coming.
Hello and welcome to the 60 Minutes podcast, Extra Minutes. I'm Amelia Adams and joining me today is our fantastic senior producer, Laura Sparks. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Amelia.
Well, we're talking today about one of really the most famous unsolved murder mysteries in the world. Yeah. And it's one of those ones where people can almost remember where they were when the news that JonBenet Ramsey was killed. She was 6 years old when she was found assaulted and strangled to death in her basement. And it has sparked one of the longest running investigations. And so we went back to Boulder, Colorado, to where it all began.
We did. It was a very cold trip, wasn't it?
Freezing cold, but it was good because the weather was good because it was exactly as it was, as we were told, when she was murdered.
Yeah.
So
well, she was found Boxing Day morning.
Yeah.
And I think that's also why it became a worldwide phenomenon because, you know, news at Christmas, there's not much of it around. And these 6-year-olds found...
And the beauty pageant queen, you know, the photos. But, of course, the most gripping part of the JonBenet story was that immediately the spotlight and suspicion was on her family. And they were a normal, well-to-do American family, parents, John and Patsy, her brother. And within days, we now know, but really weeks, they were accused of murdering her.
Well, within the day, they started pointing the finger. And you know, we interviewed John San Agustin, one of the detectives who was brought in from outside of Boulder. Yeah. And he couldn't work out why the Boulder police were focusing on the family so much, on John and Patsy. And we know that within 2 weeks, a DNA report came out. Remember, John showed you that DNA report from 1997, early 1997.
Yeah, and that cleared the family.
That's right.
So the reason we went back really was to try and shed some new light because John Ramsey, now, you know, Patsy died years ago, he's still fighting to find his daughter's murderer. Yeah. And there is potentially some hope for him, as we discovered, because there's a new investigative case who have now been put on this cold case.
Yeah, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation basically opened up the cold case. So they were given all the information from Boulder Police, who, you know, basically have always believed the family did it. Unfortunately, you and I were never able to see what they came out with, their report, but I do believe that things are looking up for John. John's nearly 81 now.
Yeah.
And, you know, as he said, he told you, he said, I don't have many more years to go here and I don't want to die without finding out who killed my daughter.
Yeah, I mean, he's an elderly man.
Yeah.
But he's incredibly switched on.
He is.
And what struck me, I mean, we met him late at night, the night before we were due to sit down and interview him. It's the first time I'd met him. You've been in contact with him on this story. You've been working on this story for a couple of years.
Yes.
He's an incredibly kind, calm, measured man.
Very measured, yeah.
He has been fighting so hard for so long, but my goodness, he's not giving up.
No. I mean, the problem that he faced is that Boulder back then was a very small town, a very affluent small town in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And so, you know, the detectives who were assigned to the case had never investigated a murder.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the most they'd ever done was like petty theft. You know, this small town, I mean, imagine a small town in Australia and there's this murder of this 6-year-old child beauty queen, you know, in a very well-off family. And so they basically did Murder 101 and pointed the finger at the family.
Well, let's talk about some of those things because you mentioned John San Agustin, who was brought in and who said that, you know, in what ways was this investigation bungled from day one. One of the things that really struck me, and I did not know this until I was, I think, standing outside the Ramsey house, was that the police on the day sent John Ramsey. They sent the missing child, because she was missing at this point. No one had found her. He'd searched the house. Daughter's missing. Oh, my goodness. They sent the father, do another search of the house. Open any doors you haven't opened, see what you can find. He found his 6-year-old daughter abused and strangled to death. I mean, that should never have been the case. We've covered a lot of different crime stories, but clear the family, clear the scene. That should have been the investigator's job.
That's right, and they didn't. And they also didn't see clear evidence, like down in the basement where she was found. There was an open window, there was a suitcase under the window, there was shards of glass on and near the suitcase.
Yeah.
And then later on, they find her DNA in the suitcase. Or strands of her hair.
That's
might have
right.
been.
So someone's tried to potentially put her body in the suitcase to get it out the window and then has abandoned that idea, is one very strong theory.
But as you know, Amelia, that was there on the day. We saw those crime scene photographs from the day.
Yeah, they were haunting images, actually, knowing what we know now. The other thing that struck me as we trampled around in the snow outside that house is that there was a whole bunch of inexperienced investigators trampling around in the snow. And John pointed this out. No one said, we need to look for snow tracks leading up to each window, the back alley, which was an ideal escape route. All of these sort of normal investigative procedures were not followed.
No, not one actually. I didn't understand the extent of the bungling.
No.
Also, until I looked into it I think it was 22 I started looking at it. And it does happen. It happens in Australia, in regional towns where police do not understand how to investigate a murder. These things happen. But, the sad thing about it is it's nearly 30 years ago.
Well, that's it.
And we still don't know who killed her.
And there's still a lot of evidence, but there's a lot of evidence which is now useless.
Yeah,
or
I mean,
missed.
John Agustin, I should say, said there was something like 2,500 leads that police never followed up on.
Them.
And because they decided that the family had done it, that the parents had done it, they didn't follow up on those leads, nor did they look at the evidence in front of them, like the suitcase, like the open window.
One of those leads that we looked into was another very similar situation. A 5-minute drive away, and we went to this house. It was another young girl. She was attacked in her home in this situation. The mother, who was asleep, heard noise and screams and commotion and came upstairs, and the attacker fled. But it was in such a close neighbourhood and there were so many similarities, and it was only a few months later.
It was 9 months later.
9 months later.
And we drove there.
Yeah.
It was a 5-minute drive away.
Yeah.
And it was the circumstances were so similar. Both families had been out, they'd come back, they'd turned their alarms on, although I'm not sure whether the Ramseys turned, but anyway, certainly this other family turned the alarm on, which signifies the fact that the intruder was already in the house.
Yes.
So the mother goes to sleep, she wakes up, she hears the noises, as you just say, and she goes in and there's her daughter, 9-year-old daughter, being assaulted.
I had never read about that case or that potential link. And when we put that to John Ramsey and his son, JonBenet's half-brother, John Andrew, they said they were aware of it at the time and they raised it with investigators and were told, oh, no, it's not. We're not looking into it.
And they were the same investigators who investigated JonBenet's murder.
So these things make you understand why the family, yes, they've been cleared. No one's in jail here claiming they were innocent. However, there's a huge amount of Americans, and indeed it's a global case where people think, oh, yeah, that's the one where the family did it. So they've technically been cleared by DNA evidence, but whoever killed JonBenet is, maybe dead, maybe long gone. It was 30 years ago, but could still be out there.
Well,
and that's all John Ramsey wants. He wants justice for his daughter.
Yeah, and John Andrew, JonBenet's half-brother, made that point. He probably hasn't aged out, whoever did it. If it was someone in their 20s or 30s, they'd still be around now. But going back to the sexual assault of the second girl, remember, they knew each other. JonBenet and the girl knew each other. They
went to the same dance school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I spoke to the father of that girl.
That's right.
They moved out of Boulder.
That's right.
And he, even now, nearly 30 years later, is still so angry that his daughter's sexual assault was never investigated properly. And even he said, Blind Freddie could see that there were
There could have been a link.
similarities with the cases.
Yeah.
And, and JonBenet and this young girl had performed in the months leading up.
That's right.
And also at this dance school, you could go in and watch the girls dance. You could go up some stairs and look down on the girls dancing
It's
in
like
this
a public
hall.
viewing, yeah. Very bizarre. One of the other pieces of evidence which I found really interesting was the stun gun.
Yeah.
And really when this murder happened, stun gun homicides, it was fairly new technology.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
So they really didn't have a lot of investigative evidence around stun gun injuries.
no
That
one
has since changed, as we found out.
Yeah, no one had really seen what a stun gun does to a person's body.
Yeah.
And the police at the time of investigating JonBenet's murder were saying these two little dots. They said it was from the back of her brother's train track. Now, we met Dr. Dobson.
Yeah. Former coroner for that county, and he was fascinating.
Yeah, and Dr. Dobson looked at the photographs back in the day and basically said this is a stun gun injury. And he knew that because 3 years prior he'd investigated another murder with exactly the same markings.
Homicide, yeah, that's right. And I'd encourage people to watch the story because this was such a fascinating part of it to me. He showed us the slides, the experiments that he did on pigs. And using different stun guns and different pressures on pig skin. And he showed us, he also showed us, which I found really confronting, the crime scene photos of JonBenet's body. And some of those, obviously, we chose not to show in the story. But the marks are identical.
Yeah. Yeah, the pigs were anaesthetised, remember?
Yes, we should
say
point
that.
out. We should point that out. Yeah.
But Dr. Dobson has now retired, but it's remained with him. This case has remained with him. And he wrote a report and gave it to Boulder Police, and they just disregarded it.
They disregarded the stun gun evidence as well.
Yeah. And we have, as a funny aside to Dr. Dobson, I arrived, I think, the day before you got there, and we were talking, and he says, and he speaks very slowly and measured,
Yes.
and he says, "Yes, I've got to find the slides," and I went, "The slides?" He said, "No, yeah, they're on slides," and so of course my producer head's going,
Yes.
"Oh no, I need to find a slide projector in
Right.
Denver, Colorado, and I've only just arrived here."
And
How
you
am I-
did.
and I did.
You pull it off as you always. But that was really important that you did.
Yeah.
That we were able to sit and look at it so he could explain it to us and that we could show it to our viewers.
Yeah.
But it was also such a good reminder of this crime was a long time
Yeah,
ago.
it's an old crime.
But there is evidence and there is research that could have been or could still be used. So I guess to that point, where to from here? Because there are so many people in this world who would have given up if they were John Ramsey or Jan Andrew. It's a case for them of we are not letting this go. And they're exhausted,
Yeah,
but I found them reinvigorated
yeah.
by some of the new developments.
Yeah, I think they're resolute, particularly because DNA was found on JonBenet's underwear, and also they've still got fingernail clippings, and on both sets of evidence, there was an unknown male DNA found. Now, let's remember, none of the family's DNA was found on any of this, right? But there was an unknown male DNA. The underwear and the clippings, they want tested by cutting-edge DNA companies now that are being employed by FBI. They only do crime solving, these companies. They want the DNA tested. They'll be able to, it's an intricate way of testing. They're able to, I can't explain it, I'm not a scientist, but they go into the DNA, extract a lot more information, and from there you use a genealogist to track down who owns this DNA. And it might not be that you find the murderer, but you might find the murderer's brother or son or daughter,
someone with
or
connected
grandson.
DNA, which could lead you to them.
That's how they
and
do it.
suddenly you've got, that person's father lived in Boulder at that time or was arrested for a break-in in that neighbourhood.
So it's an incredible mix of science and history coming together to solve cases like they did with the Golden State Killer, for anyone that might remember that story over in the States.
There's been so much pushback from the Boulder police unit over the years. There's some change there now.
Yeah. So
Pushback, I should say, to reinvestigate this
Yes.
cold case.
Yeah. So 2 years or 18 months ago now, the police chief at the time demoted or I think some of them lost their jobs.
Yeah, they cleaned it out.
Yeah, they cleaned out the investigators that had been involved initially in that case, who are still there, They're not there now. There is now a new police chief, John Ramsey. I spoke to him last night. And
how's he doing?
He's doing really well still, yeah. And he's feeling uplifted by the fact that this police chief wants to meet with him and the head of the DNA, the private DNA lab, to talk about how they get hold of this DNA. Now, why they can't get hold of it now,
It's beyond me.
Yeah, I mean, we need these cases solved.
Is it just bureaucracy?
I think it's more than that.
Yeah.
I think it's they don't want to
Covering-
admit that they're wrong.
Covering
that
themselves
they were
from
wrong.
30 years ago.
Yeah. Which is probably the biggest thing that the family is now battling. But hopefully, with the clean out of the old investigators, there's no one there now that was involved. So that's a new, turning over a new leaf, and hopefully, before John dies, he will get a result.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about here and in the story, it is very clinical and it is scientific and it is evidence-based. But one thing that John Ramsey said to us, which I think will always stay with me, was particularly as, JonBenet was 6 and my daughter's 7, he said, I still feel the tug at my heart. We talked about all the evidence and the outrage and whatnot. And he said, sometimes I see a dad holding a little girl's hand in the street and I think, and I look twice. And I just thought, my God, he's 80 and he's carried that pain.
Yeah.
And he's still carrying it.
Yeah. It is a story that has affected me as well. And I mean, I was over there in June and I went and visited him again.
Yeah.
After we'd done the story, I just went and visited him and his partner Jan in Moab in Utah. And he I don't think a day goes by that he does not think about it.
No.
And I don't think a day goes by that he does not try and find a way to work out who did this to his little
and
girl.
to keep putting pressure on the right departments so that they keep on moving, however slowly it may be. So let's hope some of that brings some answers finally.
Yeah, and we'll keep covering the story.
Yeah, we sure will.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
And do catch up on the story. And Laura did a story 18 months ago. It was in 2022.
Yeah, well, now
with Sarah
2.5 years ago almost.
Yes.
But yes, certainly 18 months from the time that
And
we
that was on the
filmed.
DNA.
The DNA.
Yeah. So you can catch up on both those on our YouTube channel or on 9 Now.